In this video, I plan on covering classes and how to code classes in JavaScript. But first, I also wanted to redefine the purpose for this playlist on my YouTube channel. So you'll notice that I've created another browser games playlist, making browser games projects. And there's a reason I did this. I believe that people learn to code best when they are simply applying what they learn immediately. I used to think that I should learn everything about one language, memorize everything, master it all before even trying to do anything big. And that kind of mindset will slow you down significantly. That's why in this series, even though I've done it imperfectly, I've tried to emphasize making projects as we go along. Even though in our normal Making Browser Games series, I only really have 2 game projects and they're not even that advanced. What I plan on doing now is focusing more on this new playlist, adding more projects, more advanced projects, so we can continue learning as we go and with more exciting stuff to come. But if there's something I haven't explained and need to, what I'm going to do is put a video of that, say, basics tutorial, and I'm going to put it in this series. So the purpose for this playlist, which is the one you're currently watching, is simply getting the basics or any concept that is new in order to complete something that's going to be done in this playlist. So really, if you're coming from a position of a lot of experience with coding, you can frankly ignore this one from now on and then focus on the second one. So I wanted to explain that. Now I'm going to explain how classes work, which is going to be important for the very next game project I'm going to do. The next game project is going to be a space game, and I really wanted to teach classes first because this is going to greatly improve the organization of our code. And right now, the code I have is just our basic HTML here, a 500 by 500 pixel canvas surrounded by a black border in the CSS. And all I've done is I grabbed the canvas with this line of code and created the context. So imagine that we're making a game where there are players and there are criminals that the player has to hunt down, which is not hard to imagine for me because I'm actually making a game like this, and hopefully I'll put it on my YouTube channel at some point. So let's say there's only two types of people in this game, players and criminals. And we're going to represent both of them with boxes. So for the player, we need an X and a Y. So var P X for player X, and let's start the player at 100 for the X. We'll put him at also 100 for the Y. Now a player is going to need health, so P health equals 100. The player needs a color, var P color, and the player will be red. What else? The player needs a width and a height, or since we'll just do boxes, let's do a size. Var size and P size for player size, and let's make it 20. So the player is at the X of 100, Y 100, and has the dimensions of 20 by 20 pixels. So it took us, to represent the player, it took us 6 variables at minimum. That's not even game worthy yet, but it took, pretend I can count, that's 5. When I practiced recording this video, I didn't do size, I did P width and then P height, which is probably why I said 6 just now. There are 5 variables. It took us 5 variables to represent the player. Now we can draw the player. Let's first clear the screen. So context.fill style, and let's fill the screen with the color gray. Context.fill rect 0, 0, canvas.width, canvas.height. And that should now be gray screen. Let's draw the player next. Context.fill style equals P color. Context.fill rect PX, PY, P size, P size. And we can now draw the player who's represented by this box here. Now, we haven't even looked at the criminals. In order to create a criminal, I'm going to need all this same data. And I don't want to just assume that the criminal's the same size as the player, so I'm not going to reuse this. I don't want to assume that the criminal's the same color as the player, so I'm not going to reuse this variable either. So I'm left with no choice but to recreate all of it. Criminal X and 10 we'll put there. var criminal y 0, var criminal health for combat purposes also 100. The criminal color will be orange. Var criminal size will also be 20. Now I can draw the criminal, also represented as a box. So fill style is going to be criminal color, and then we'll fill the rectangle. Fill rect, criminal x, criminal y, criminal size, criminal size. If I did everything correctly, we should now have an orange box right there. But now there's a big problem. Every single time we try to create an entity, we have to create 5 different variables to go with it. And this is not well organized. Because say I wanted 100 criminals. Well, how am I supposed to do that? Am I supposed to create all these variables again, except make this criminal 2, criminal 2, criminal 2, criminal 2, criminal 2. This is terrible organization because there are way too many variables here. So we have a problem. We have these variables are all together in the code, but they're not organized. They're not organized as one. We need a way of taking these variables and putting them as one, like one criminal variable instead of 5 different ones that represent the criminal. Wouldn't it be nice if we could create one single criminal variable that contained all this data? That's what a class is. Here's how we create a class. You type the word class criminal. This is going to let us combine all our data into one object. And after you type class criminal, you create 2 curly brackets as if you were doing a function. Now inside, we're going to create a constructor. This is simply a function that goes inside of a class that creates an object of that class type. So this function is going to let us create a criminal. Now, all this data that we put here, we're going to put in here, but not as var. We have to put this dot x, this dot y, this dot health. And by the way, I'm no longer putting C for criminal because that would be redundant. We're inside the criminal class, so I don't need criminal X, criminal Y. We know what we're talking about here. This dot size. And finally, this dot color equals orange. So I finally did it. I took all of our variables here and I combined it into a single criminal class. Now, don't let constructor confuse you. This is simply a function that will create a criminal that has these variables. Let's see how to do that. So I'm going to start by deleting. No, I won't do that yet. So I'm going to create a criminal variable. Var criminal is equal to new criminal. Notice that these two names match. And by the way, even when I type new criminal, I'm basically putting in the command to run this constructor. And every single time you create a new criminal, this constructor runs. So now what I can do is I can draw this criminal, but I can delete all of this data here and replace it. We draw the criminal right down here. And I'm going to get rid of the player since we no longer need the player. That was just an example. We're really going to focus on the criminal for now. So when we're drawing the criminal, I'm not going to use C color, CY, CX. I'm going to use criminal dot color. Notice the name. This name matches the name of the variable I made. And like a variable, this could be anything. I could call this C. I could call this crook. I'm calling the variable criminal. But there's no magic in naming the variable the same as a class minus a capital letter. There's no magic in that. This can be whatever you want. So I'm going to set, after we clear the gray screen here, I'm going to set the fill style to the criminal dot color. That dot means belongs to. Color belongs to criminal. And I'm going to replace these with criminal dot x, criminal dot y, criminal dot size. I'm messing up so much here. Criminal dot size. And I'm going to delete all the rest. And if I did everything correctly, the player's gone, but our criminal is still there. Now, notice that even though you might be a bit confused by the class to start with. In the long run, this is going to be a lot easier than trying to create 5 different variables and having, by the end of your game, 500 different variables to represent just the criminals. Now, classes can do a bit more. Classes can also have functions in them. So a class can use variables, but it could also have its own function. So I'm going to give a attack function for this criminal. And all the attack function will do is console.log I am attacking. Pretty useless, but for the sake of example. To run this function, I would say criminal.attack. Because again, the attack function belongs to the criminal, which is why I put the dot. So if I refresh, I get I am attacking in the console here. Now we can do something a bit more useful. I can also create a draw function for the criminal, which is in fact the style that I use for coding. I typically put the draw function inside of a class instead of randomly drawing out here. So for the draw, what needs to happen? Well, I'm going to give context as a parameter. So like this context here that we need in order to draw, I'm going to pass that in as a parameter to the criminal's draw function. I'll explain why in a second. And what we need to do here is say context.fillStyle equals this.color. Notice there's a difference. Outside the class, we would say criminal.color. But when we're inside the class, working with the class itself, we use this, the keyword this. And that just stands for this criminal object, its own color. So outside, you're going to use the name of your variable, criminal.color, if you're outside your class. Inside your class, if you need to use one of your variables, you use the keyword this. So we're using our own color variable, so context.fillStyle, this.color. Now let's add context.fillRect, this.x, this.y, this.size, this.size. Now what I can do is I can delete all this and replace it with criminal.draw and give it the context. And now it should draw in the exact same position, and it does, but it's a lot more organized because let's say that I wanted to create let's say I wanted to create a second criminal, and I'm going to get rid of this attack. And I'm also going to move this to the top just so we can really just see the code we're working with. All right, I'm going to create a second criminal. Var criminal2 equals new criminal. And again, in the past, this would have taken us 5 more variables, but now I can do it all in one line. But just so they don't draw in the exact same spot, I'm going to change this one's position. Criminal2.x is equal to 100. Now we're going to draw criminal number 1, and we're then going to draw criminal 2. Draw context. If I refresh this here, we now have 2 criminals here at different locations. And this was really easy to do because we reused this draw function. And that's an aspect of classes that I didn't explain properly yet. Classes, not only do they let us take data and organize it all together under one object. These are objects, by the way. Criminal 2, these are considered objects of a class, or instances of a class is the proper coding term. We organized our code, but also we are reusing code. That's what classes are really good at. See, if we wanted to do the draw function without the class, like this code, we would have had this twice down here, except fill in the variables for criminal 1 and 2. But by using a function inside of a class, we are simply reusing the same code. Now, let's go back to our original example. I want 100 criminals to be drawn at random positions on this screen. Now, at the start of this video, without any knowledge of classes, that would have been pretty much impossible. We would have had 500 variables, criminal 1, criminal 2, criminal 3. But now we are organizing our code much better, and we can do a lot of tricks. So I'm going to delete this and delete this. I'm going to create a list of criminals. Criminals, and I'm going to start it as an empty list, but I'm going to use a for loop to create 100 criminals at random positions. So let's create the criminal. Let, I'm using the keyword let because the variable is going to be temporary. New criminal v new criminal, like that. And before we even do this, I actually forgot to explain something. Constructors can also have parameters. So in fact, what I did earlier where I created 2 criminals, but for the second one I said criminal2.x equals 100, there's an even better way of doing it. I can just tell when I create the criminal exactly, I can tell it exactly where to go. I'm going to add 2 parameters to the constructor. Start X, start Y. Those are going to be the starting positions for this criminal. Instead of setting the X variable to 0, I'm going to set it to whatever those variables, those parameters are. Again, a constructor is just a function, and because it's a function, it can use parameters. So now when I would create a criminal, var criminal, I can say new criminal, but specify X and Y to be something like this, which is going to be a lot easier for what we're about to do. Because I'm going to create a random starting X, so let rand X, and let's just spawn the criminal anywhere on the page. So that's going to be math.floor, math.random times canvas dot width. So that's going to be a random number between 0 and the width of our screen. Now let's create a random y. Rand y is math.floor, math.random times canvas.height. A random number between 0 and the height of our screen. So both of these together will give us a random position in our screen. So now, because I added parameters to my criminal, what I can do is say let new criminal be new criminal, and then parentheses, rand x, rand y. And these these variables go straight to this constructor here and modify our class. And this is a better way than what we had a second ago. If we didn't have this, we would have had to do new criminal and then say new criminal dot x is equal to rand x, and then new criminal dot y is equal to rand y. But we have a better system now using parameters. You can pass parameters into the constructor. I'm going to wrap this up since the videos are getting long. Let's add this new criminal to the list. Criminals dot length is equal to new criminal. And now he's added to the list. But now I can also draw all 100 criminals using another for loop. I is going to be less than criminals.length, I plus plus. And what we're going to say here is criminals.draw and give it the context. Now, we should get 100 randomly placed boxes. And I don't because criminal.draw is not a function. Oh, criminals I.draw. Remember, criminals is the list. Criminals, a number, that is one of the criminals. Criminals I will give us one of the criminals in the list in order. Because I is 0, we're going all the way to the length. So I want to actually use the draw function for the criminals, not the list by itself. That was probably confusing. I'll move on. Criminals I.draw. Refresh, and we now have 100 criminals, really just boxes, placed randomly on our screen. And every single time you refresh, it calculates new random positions for them. And notice, classes really make this possible, because without a class, I would have needed 5 variables per criminal that I wanted to create. And also, classes can be put in lists, as you just now saw. We have one for loop that creates 100 random criminals and adds them all to a list. Another for loop that runs our draw function. And our draw function is really useful. It's getting reused all the time. We didn't have to rewrite this code at all. Now, before I end the video, I do want to explain why I used context in a parameter. This code would have worked without it if I deleted context here and I deleted context here. That's because context is a variable that's up here, and because it is defined up here, it's also going to be known, recognized, or defined down here. In other words, when our browser is reading our code and it sees context inside the draw function of a criminal, it's going to know, hey, this context, they're talking about this one. So we're going to run into no issues. The problem is if I ever wanted to move this criminal into a different file, like I move this class into a different file, which is something I do a lot, well, now context in that other file is going to be unknown because this context is in this file here, but we separated it. So if I use a parameter for context, then we would be spared that trouble there. And really, I like to do this by habit anyways. Alright, that was a longer video than I intended. Thank you for watching. Very next video is going to be our space game. And this classes tutorial definitely will pay off since every game project I'm going to be doing in the future is going to involve classes.